Commissioners, now I want to shift gears a little bit. We have spent numerous presentations over the last 3 or 4 years talking to you all about our investment in infrastructure, how we want to continue to invest in our assets to make sure that aging infrastructure is replaced and we have the resources there that we need to serve our communities going forward. We have not taken very much time to talk to you about how we are investing in our human assets. We all here recognize that that's the most important asset that we have, so we want to spend a little time talking about that today. In December, you recall we had some presentations on our leadership development program that we're doing with the executive group. Today we're going to shift a little bit and talk to you a little bit about some projects that we've had going on, in particular in our construction area. This is a 3-part presentation. We'll start with Susan Edwards doing the introduction, and then she will introduce 2 projects that have occurred in the last little bit. But let me focus first on the managers that you'll hear from today. Tracy Hayes in this presentation is representing the underground construction area. He has served as manager there for several years. And John Williams, the overhead construction area. But as you know, we shift people around all the time, and we did that in January with our management group. So these 2 guys have new assignments now. Tracy is over both construction groups now, and John is a manager working directly for Susan in our corporate areas, HR, and all the things that Susan's responsible for. But today you'll see presentations on projects that they worked on when they were in their previous assignments last year. So I'll recognize Susan now.
That's a great lead into our first slide. In the presentations that you heard over the years about our asset management programs, our Century 2, we often review the steps that we go through in that process. That's looking at a comprehensive system assessment. What are the needs of our system? How do we prioritize those needs to be sure we're meeting the most important things first? What ongoing inspection and maintenance programs are needed so that we can maintain those assets while they're in service? Developing a long-term replacement plan so that we have an organized method of meeting those needs over time. And as we all know, very importantly, the financial plan to support all of those things. The steps we go through on the workforce side are very similar. We do comprehensive staffing assessments. We look across the organization at what the needs are, and then we prioritize those needs. Where do we need to focus our efforts, whether it's in areas where we expect to lose talent to retirement, or where it's new technology areas where we need new skills. So we prioritize those critical staffing needs. Our equivalent for inspection and maintenance is performance management and employee development. That's where we're able to look at employee skills, identify areas where they may need training or development, and then providing that. The leadership development program that Ms. Roach just mentioned is one example of that. We're actually kicking that off at employee level next week with some new programs for employees in leadership development. So that's a very important piece. We develop staffing plans looking forward into the future so that we can be sure we're hitting those marks. And our equivalent of the financial plan is our commitment to competitive pay and benefits. That's important that we key to the market in all of our critical positions. We want to be sure that we're able to attract people who want to work at KUB. We also want to be competitive to retain them over time, but we're also sensitive to being sure that we're attuned to what our customers can afford to pay. So we're always balancing those two things. The case studies you're going to hear today are just 2 examples of projects that we've worked on that are sort of under this umbrella of workforce management. And the first one is our underground response technician project. This was sort of a tactical level project. It was an answer to a need that was identified at the level of the work that's getting done in underground construction. And they did a lot of work identifying what the needs are we're trying to meet with this position, and how we're going to get our employees trained and ready to do what's required. The second is the presentation that John will give on our Lineworker Apprentice program. This is a longer-term, more strategic project, and it's the nature of this type of work that sometimes it takes starting at one point and investing in the time that it takes for many years to see the results, and you'll see the results that have been paid off for our employees and our customers in developing this program. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way, and I'm going to turn things over to Tracy first so he can tell you about our underground response.
Thanks, Susan. Commissioners, before we get into the details of the underground response technician, I want to give you just a little sneak peek into kind of what goes on in an ordinary day in underground construction. What you see here is one of our maps that displays our crews that are located throughout our service territory. And on any given day, about 80% of those crews are working on what we call planned work. We love to plan work. It's always better to put a work plan in place and work off that plan, and we do that about 80% of the time. By the way, last week there was not much planned work going on, okay? So I will tell you that we were in full emergency response mode, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a few minutes. But when you think about planned work, really, and you're looking around our system, you're going to see three primary things going on at any given day when we're operating and working on our natural gas, water, and wastewater infrastructure. Over here, you see new pipe being installed. We're taking out old pipe and we're putting in new pipe. So there's always some project that's going on where we're installing new infrastructure. We've been talking about the Century 2 program for a number of years now, and that right there is a perfect example of where we're installing new infrastructure. Also, we're installing new infrastructure to serve customers, new homes, new commercial customers, new industrial customers. So we're always installing some form of new infrastructure on a given day, on an average day. With hundreds of miles of pipe in the ground, that pipe has to be maintained. And so every day our crews are out there operating valves, key valves, looking at our infrastructure. And as you see right here with this picture, this is an example of one of our wastewater closed caption TV vans. And those two technicians right there are getting ready to stick a camera down into the manhole and start looking to see if we have any blockage or any problems with that sewer system. And we run 2 of those crews every day, 5 days a week, and sometimes even into the weekend. Our third portion of planned work, it sounds a little funny at first, but it's what we call non-emergency repairs. As I said earlier, we like to plan work when we can. It's good for the community, it's good for traffic control, it's good for customers that are impacted. So, but there's times when we have leaks. Let's say an example of maybe a small water leak, and it's not doing any damage, immediate damage to property. It's not causing any safety issues. So, and we want to get on that repair as quickly as we can, but we try to plan those non-emergency repairs, typically into a 3 to 5 day turnaround. And again, that helps us to manage traffic control. As you can see from this one, this is a non-emergency repair where we have a small leak, and as you can see, there's tight quarters, and we're trying to make sure that we handle those in the best way that we possibly can. Again, on a given day, this is around 80 to 85% of our work is planned. Now let's talk about work that we don't plan for. As a matter of fact, it happened this morning. We've had 2 dig-ins between 9 and 12 o'clock this morning on third-party damages. What are third-party damages? These are people that are out around our system, telecommunication contractors, other utility providers that are doing work on their system, and even sometimes homeowners. Occasionally we'll have dig-ins from people installing fences and mailboxes, and our facilities get damaged. And this is an example of one where a gas service has been cut by a third-party contractor. And as Gabe talked about, we experienced this pretty much all week last week, we have system problems. We've talked about our aging infrastructure, and from time to time throughout the day, we will have to respond and address system problems. This is an example of one of our construction crews, technicians, putting a clamp on a water line that has broken. So that's how our work looks on a typical day. Now let's dive into this emergency response, because that's really what we're talking about. Anytime that we have to respond in an emergency response situation, and our technicians that are here today will attest to this. There's many things going on, and you're moving quickly, and the adrenaline's running, and everything's really excited. But in the back of their minds, they're managing these 5 critical things. Okay, first and foremost, number one, it's always about safety. Okay, so it's safety for customers, it's safety for the public that could be impacted, and it's also safety for our employees. So the first thing that we're doing when we're making that emergency response, we're focusing on safety first. Also, though, in the back of our mind, we're thinking customer. We're thinking customer impact. We're thinking about reliability. You hear us talk so much about providing reliable and affordable service. Well, we're constantly sitting here thinking, hey, how is this going to impact the customer? If I have to turn this valve off to make this safe, how many customers are going to be affected? So that's always in the back of their mind. Also, something that's always going on in the background that most people don't know is we're in constant communication with our system operations at Middlebrook Pike. We have operators that are there 24/7. They're monitoring the system. They're watching the system. And so while we have folks out with eyes on the job site, we have people back in our operations center monitoring and seeing how we're impacting the system. Again, if we have to close a main valve, if we have to change our infrastructure in any way, they are the hub of the wheel, if you will. They are the nucleus that's sitting there watching all of our systems to ensure that we're not having negative impacts across the system. And if we are having negative impacts, then we're prepared for that so we can let our customers know. Another very, very critical part of this, again, this is some things that you don't really see that's going on behind the scenes. It's the men are always looking and thinking about resource deployment. It happened yesterday on a response that we had to make downtown. You're in a very confined area, near the old courthouse, and you're working and you're trying to respond to that event. And the first thing that you're looking at is, I can't get a backhoe here. I can't get a track hoe here. It is way too close. And so immediately what the responders are doing, they're talking with our construction personnel, our supervisors, and saying, how are we going to manage this event, to manage it efficiently and effectively? So those are going on. And last but certainly not least, regulatory compliance. Every time we have an event, we have to provide documentation for our regulators. TRA, Tennessee Regulatory Authority, TDEC, they want to know and understand what's going on with their systems. So that's a very, very important part of it. Now, in times past, when we made this emergency response, we handled it through our experienced construction personnel. And the role was rotated. And it was rotated based on need, based on whether the department needed that person doing construction work or whether they needed that person to do responder work. And the problem that we ran up against when looking at this was consistency. As we talked about managing those critical 5 things, there's a lot of training involved with that. A lot of training involved with safety procedures, handling equipment, safe operations, and what we were finding is, we get someone trained and they're ready to go, and then we rotate them over to a construction crew. Or maybe they decide, hey, I really don't like dealing with these customers one-on-one. This is not me. I'd rather talk to a backhoe versus a customer. And we have quite a few of those guys. And so we had some of those differing skill levels that really was good for construction, but may not be good for dealing with customers. So what did we do? Those top 5 things that I talked about a few minutes ago all have safety personnel, a manager of overhead construction, the manager of safety, supervisors, and they were intimately involved, human resources, with giving us input on, hey, what are we trying to accomplish here? And so we spent a lot of time reviewing the job, better understanding the skills, and at the end of the day, we felt like it needed to be a new classification. We felt like it needed to be a separate career path. We felt like that trying to weave this in and out with our construction personnel was not a good fit. So we felt like we had qualified internal candidates that were there. We just wanted to get the right ones. So we posted the job internally, and the technicians that are here today will attest to this. We put them through it. I mean, we put them through a lot of testing and a lot of problem solving. We wanted to make sure most of them already had the job knowledge, but we really wanted to touch on that independent judgment, decision making, because keep in mind, 3 o'clock in the morning, you're alone, and you're making that decision. You don't have a 4-man crew around you. You are there, and you have to make those decisions. And they will attest to this. That's not always a fun feeling, but you're there, and you're alone, and everybody else is gone. So that independent judgment, decision making is critical, and we spend a lot of time trying to assess that, okay, and get that right. At the end of the day, we ended up with 14 response technicians. We feel good about their skills. We feel good because they're comfortable. Everyone that is in this role feels comfortable dealing with the customer. They feel comfortable with making those independent decisions. They feel comfortable with that judgment that they know that's on their backs. I feel good about it because it's a great career track for our employees. It offers a new career track. We use the example of when we did the interviewing, you could always see these people that say, I like my truck this way. I like my air conditioning this way. I want my tools so-and-so. They're individual guys that really take a lot of pride in their individual performance. And it's a great career track. We felt like it was important to recognize the challenges. This is a 24/7, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day operation, rotating shifts. And if anyone's worked a rotating shift, that can be a challenge for you individually and a challenge for your family. And we wanted to reflect that in our pay, and we did. In summary, we have the 4 technicians. We have continued to spend time targeting their customer skills. They know this. We're always doing technical training. This is an example of one of the tools we use. This is a gas indicator where he's checking to see if he can pick up any gas in that valve box. And most importantly, we continue to work on that judgment and that independent decision making, because that is so critical. But in closing, what I'd like to say is I'm excited. I am really excited about this for our technicians. It's a great career track for them. But most importantly, I'm excited because this is a good thing for our customers. It really is. This is a great thing, and our customers are going to be better served. Thanks.
Tracy. Commissioners, as we look at this second case study on our Lineworker Apprentice Program, I want to first draw your attention back to 2006 when we first started looking at this from a workforce planning environment. In 2006, the industry was facing some looming retirements, an aging workforce, and this was faced all over the country. At the same time that the workforce projections were dim as far as a depletion of the skilled workforce, you're also looking at a projected demand that's going to be increasing. So clearly the industry had some work ahead of them. At the same time, in looking at our own workforce, we mirrored the industry in a lot of ways. As you can see from the percentages there, 25% of our line workers were facing retirements. And when I say facing retirements, that means at that point in time they were eligible. They had worked their years of service at KUB and had all the criteria to be able to retire with benefits at KUB. The most astonishing number really is when you look at the line worker foreman. And those are the folks that lead our crews every day, the most experienced leaders in our workforce, and the majority of those were eligible for retirement. The troublemen, that's a group of our first responders, but very similar in function to what Tracy just described with the underground response technicians. What also makes this complex is that the time to train competent line workers is quite lengthy. You have quite a significant amount of technical training as well as education that goes with that. And then fundamentally, there's just an element of time and experience that goes into a craft such as this for them to be able to learn and then ultimately demonstrate that they can do this job safely. So certainly was a challenge ahead of this as we move forward. Historically, we had a model for employees that that were interested in this career path. More times than not, they would enter through an entry-level position at KUB, would work in that capacity or in several capacities throughout some time, would ultimately apply and be selected for an apprenticeship if they were successful in that regard. Once they would do that, they would then work through 5 progressive levels of training and experience to ultimately qualify as a journeyman line worker. And working through this process, it was a good model. It served us well. We have a lot of really skilled professional line workers and foremen and troublemen through this process. The one challenge, though, looking forward, especially if you kind of put in place where we were in 2006, was the time to full competency in this model was anywhere from 6 to 14 years. And we didn't have that kind of time on our hands. We put together a group from human resources, also from safety and overhead construction to look at how we were going to respond to that challenge. We knew we had imminent retirements on the horizon, and we knew we had to change our program, enhance our program to be able to reach that. At the same time, we knew that we needed to make some changes. We also wanted to stay true to the things that served us well over the years. We had really good administration in place, a good structure for how we assess and train the apprentices. We had an advisory apprentice committee that helped us with making recommendations for when they were ready and teaching them. So we wanted to hold true to those. At the same time, the industry changes. Technology changes, tools and equipment, operational expectations change, and customer expectations change. We wanted to make sure that we had a robust curriculum to be able to get them the technical knowledge that they needed to be successful in the next generation of line work and working within the utility structure at KUB. Through this process, we also wanted to hold true to the career development options for our own employees. At the same time, we recognized we needed to open that up externally to be able to get in a broader pool of applicants, and to also at the same time improve our diversity in the position. At the core of all of this throughout the process was safety. We had to keep our eye on that ball and make sure that each element, we train them to be safe and effective in what they do. We ultimately recommended and implemented 2 different career tracks on how this would work, or 2 career paths. The first being enhancements to our apprentice program. That was in place for some time, and we made some enhancements to that. The one thing that was very obvious was, in addition to providing opportunities for those internal to KUB that wanted in that career path, we opened that externally. And we posted those, we bring those folks in. Once hired, we knew we had to have a training partner along this way. And we selected Southeast Lineman Training Center right out of Trenton, Georgia. At the time, and I'll draw your attention to this picture, at the time they had several classes that had gone through there, training line workers. We first went down to the first class. It was about 3 polls worth of apprentices that had graduated. This last class that these gentlemen participated in, there was 9. So they've certainly grown as we've grown with them as well. Interestingly, obviously, there's only a couple of those in that picture that are ours. The majority are much like people would enter colleges or trade schools. Same process. They'd pay their way, and then at the end of the process, hope to hire on with a company in that line of work. The initial program that they had that was really intriguing to us and we found a lot of value in was their 15-week line worker program. This is a 15-week retreat at Trenton, Georgia, if you want to call it that, the home away from home, where they would go for 15 weeks straight. And during that time, they would learn everything from how to unpack their climbing gear and put it on, to climb poles, and to ultimately learn framing and rigging and equipment operation. They would also start the beginning of their modules, that curriculum we spoke of, and starting a nationally recognized program that would take them throughout their apprentice program. During this school, there's also a great emphasis on safety, and they start that with the technical training, and they teach that as how they teach the work. Once they complete the 15 weeks, then they begin to work on our crews, begin the on-the-job training process, which is very critical, and also begin interfacing with our instructors in classrooms and field environments to be able to continue to build their skills. They returned to Trenton for twice, two extra times, one for an overhead lab and one for an underground lab, before ultimately successfully completing the program. One thing to note of interest is this is a training program, and unlike a lot of KUB positions, or most KUB positions, where once hired you serve an initial 12-month probationary period, apprentices throughout the entire program are on a probationary status since it is a training program. So once they complete the program, become a journeyman line worker, then they'll serve their initial 12-month probationary period, and that in that position before gaining classified status. The great, I guess, success of all this, in addition to the enhanced technical knowledge and all the things along the way they get from that, is we've done a good job at compressing that time to full competency or qualifications as a journeyman line worker from that 6 to 14 year range down to about an average of 5 years. Certainly, facing the imminent retirements that we were, this apprentice program, while great in its design, couldn't meet all of our needs. We had to have another mechanism in which to continue to build our workforce. The second option that we really began to explore more was just hiring line workers directly from the market. We've done that some in the past, mostly with some of our contractors we were familiar with, but the reality is that there's a lot of very good journeyman line workers that work outside of KUB, and so we felt that there was a good option here for us to attract and ultimately hire them along the way. The only limitation in this group is that they may not be as familiar with KUB. Some of the contractors tend to specialize in one or more areas of line work as opposed to the broad spectrum of work we do in the utility environment. And those that work on other utility systems may be familiar with other standards or specifications. But bringing them up to speed on those things is much quicker, and obviously you can see that the time to full competency could be even less than what it was with the apprentice class. In the end, there are benefits from both options. Neither option exclusively could have met our needs. The apprentice program, although a shorter time of competency, certainly wouldn't meet our initial hiring needs to be able to keep things going along the way. At the same time, the journeyman market, hiring directly, there's just not enough depth, and it's certainly not wide enough to be able to attract and maintain all that as well. One key benefit as well is as we brought in this new curriculum and this new expansion of our technical training, we've been able to migrate that over to our continuing education for our own journeyman line workers and foremen and patrolmen. So at the same time we're improving the technical knowledge of those entering the workforce at KUB, we're also using that same to increase the knowledge in our continuous training. The results. You saw the numbers in the beginning in 2006, and we were facing looming retirements, and they came true. The good news of that is, despite losing 46 very talented and experienced individuals along the way, we're able to replace those with qualified employees, both in the journeyman market, hiring directly, as well as apprentices. We've had 9 apprentices that have entered the program and successfully completed it and are now performing work as journeyman line workers, and are helping to train our future generations as well. At the same time, we have 12 apprentices currently developing and are in some level of the program today. I think the most staggering number when you look at this is the journeyman line worker pool, if you want to call it that, really is the foundational pool for the foreman and the patrolmen as well. It's the same skill set that leads to progression in either of those classifications. And when you look in 2006, 55% of those individuals, over half of our qualified workforce, was eligible to retire. Over the past few years, through this process, we've moved that deal down to less than 17%. So while that process has netted us a much more sustainable workforce, we also have a solution moving forward to meet the needs of the future. The last point I would like to make is that as part of this, there was a lot of benefits from a workforce perspective and having a workforce moving forward that was sustainable and preparing for the future. But one of the indirect benefits that I thought was unique and at the end of the day a very positive advantage of this is we now have a mechanism through our apprentice program for those experienced workers who have invested a lot of time in KUB to have a way for them to invest in the future. They are participating actively in the training and the mentoring of our new classes and have a much greater attitude and energy about them as they're now shaping the future generations of line workers at KUB, which is a very good thing overall for the overall attitude and energy level within the workforce. So with that, I'll close, answer any questions you may have.
Great. Anybody have any questions for Tracy?
Sure.
Or John?
Sure. To Tracy, as it relates to the third-party benefits, how do we improve on eliminating those type of processes that happen? I know it's something that we can handle now.
Yeah, well, education is the excavators through our 811 system, call before you dig. And we promote it. You'll see us promoting our vehicles. You'll see us promoting it. And matter of fact, Mr. Randolph serves on the 811 board. But sometimes excavators get in a hurry, even if they make a one call, and the response techs will vouch for this. They sometimes just get too close and also just get in a hurry. So I think that the best way to approach it is through education as much as we can, but we have been doing that for a number of years.
We also file claims against them to compensate KUB for the cost of those repairs.
John, would you go back about 2 slides to the fellow on the pole? I'd like to ask one of these new guys here, how do you get your strap above that lower line? Say,
These are underground guys.
oh, they're.
No, the first row's over.
The front row is overhead.
So how do you do that?
That's,
I climb with 2 straps. And when you get to the bottom, you transition with one, release the other one. When you get around it, put the other one back on, take the one back off. It's just over and under with 2 different straps.
That makes me, I was figuring out to hug that pole.
Back in the old days, I did, but not anymore.
Well, that's good, thank you. And the other question I had, John, is there an underground department in the overhead department?
There is.
Yeah.
Overhead construction, really at a high level is electric construction versus underground. I point to Tracy because I'm so used to having opposite roles here. Underground being gas, water, wastewater construction. But within overhead construction, as we call it, you have everything really that's exiting the substation all the way to the meter. So the sub-transmission system, the 13 kV distribution, overhead and underground. You also have our network system downtown. And there is some substation maintenance we do on the structure itself on the outside of that. So there's quite a variety of work within the context of overhead construction. Yes, ma'am.
That year of 6 to 14 to become a full competency, seems like you'd have a lot invested in KUB, so you'd be more likely to stay at KUB. Do most of the, I guess 2 questions. One, have most of the guys that started at KUB continue their careers? But now that you've shortened that length, do you anticipate that some of those guys you might go elsewhere, potentially?
To answer your first question, we have a great track record of retention in this particular area. When people start in this field, that's an area where they tend to grow. We do a lot of things within the department to find ways for them to grow within KUB, whether it's through more informal positions like lead journeymen, where they maybe lead the activities in the air or in the training environment where the foreman's conducting the work itself, the foreman role, troubleman role. So there's a lot of opportunity for them to grow within the department. The other thing is, with the variety of work we have, we're able to challenge them by rotating them around to the different areas, so they're constantly in a position. Brought on in the last few years, shortening that length of time. We certainly hope that we're providing the right environment. I think Susan touched on some of the things we try to do from a competitive pay and benefits. We also look at ways to make sure we recognize them and appreciate them. I know we had an event even this morning in underground construction, recognizing them for all the hard work they put in the last week with the work they've done. So I think that's on our mind. Retention is always one of the elements we're looking at, along with everything else along the way. And we hope that we're looking at this group however many years from now, and they're still here and advancing their careers. That's certainly our intention.
I have one other question, John. In the training process, is this a universal training? I know so often when our neighboring states may have storms a lot larger than home base where we are, we had to ship them out someplace. Does this training they get, where they have to train on, is it comparable to they can utilize the same process when they go to another location to provide assistance and helping out another company?
Fundamentally, yes. Where you have variances is going to be on your system specifications or standards, or Gabe could describe better than I could, just the overall the voltage configurations, how they transmit, how they move and regulate their system. Some of the construction standards are going to vary from system to system, even locally. Most of those, though, once they understand the fundamentals of it all, it typically works the same. They just need to kind of understand the nuances of the system. And while we typically don't send, or haven't in a long time sent our own folks away on storm restoration, that's typically a contractor function that we'll release. If we were to choose to do that, they would have the capabilities in those situations.
Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but when we have crews come here to help us, we don't just turn those crews loose on our system. They're accompanied with someone from KUB Engineering or someone from overhead to deal with those nuanced differences between systems. Is that,
Yes, that's
is that
exactly
correct?
And that's very typical of storm restoration. The other thing in storm restoration you have as an advantage is you're typically dealing with a situation where you're rebuilding. So you're not dealing with energized systems as much. You're re-energizing them through the construction process or reconstruction. So there's some advantages there, but Ms. Roach is exactly correct. We put someone with them, we'll call them a bird dog, with the maps and the standards and the specs, and they're the ones that actually communicate back and forth with system operations and control the switching procedures and all the things from a safety perspective, so that we have the workforce, but we also have essentially an assigned foreman for that particular process. Sure. Thank you.
Which of you guys are underground?
It's Susan's.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
If you'll indulge us, just one more slide. I was just going to close out. You see now a couple of examples of how we've used different mechanisms to meet the needs of our work. Here we go. We are doing this every day. We're always managing to our staffing plan to make sure that we stay within those limits, but we're still making sure that we meet our critical needs, and we do that by how we recruit. Sometimes we have to cast a broader net to get a certain set of skills and recruit beyond our normal Knoxville area pool. We have career development options. You've heard about a couple of those today. Leadership development is another one we've spoken about that is in process for our management group and in the works for our employees starting off next week. We do a lot of cross-training and rotational assignments, particularly in customer service areas lately. We've had a good opportunity to move people around so that they see different aspects of the business. Our student employment is another important program. We have at any given time about 40 students working in departments across KUB that many times result in full-time employment, including the two presenters you've heard this morning. Both John and Tracy started here as students, so we place a lot of value in that route as well. We've talked a lot about compensation and benefits already, so I won't repeat that. But I was really glad to hear John mention recognizing employee performance. That is something that we have tried to do a better job of in recent years, and especially in what I would call headline events, things like the winter weather last week or our major storms of the past couple of years. I think we've done a better job of going out and intentionally, having events and breakfasts and things to say thank you to the people who have really put in the extra work. Our focus this year is really on growing that program to recognize the things that are going on every day that contribute to the success of this organization, but may not be at that headline level. So you'll be hearing more about that in the months to come as we get that up and going. Bottom line, all of these things are working together to make sure we've got that qualified workforce to meet our customer needs. And now I'll get to what I think everybody would like to hear, which is the introduction of our guests today. Front row is our line workers. If y'all would stand up, we'd like to introduce Kwasi Boateng, Harold Flowers, who I will point out was elected president of the entire class at Trenton, Georgia. So all those people on the polls elected him their leader this year. Jeff Howard. He's a good example of someone, he actually came from underground. Michael Wampler and Spencer Wye. So we're glad to have them with us today. We have a smaller group of underground response techs, but we want to recognize them as well. There's a group of 14, but some of them are working now, and some of them worked last night, some of them are getting ready to work. So we asked this group to join us today as a sort of a representative sample of the whole group. So Todd Allen is with us, Sherman Holmes, and Rick Marsh. We appreciate you all being with us today as well. And that concludes our workforce presentation. Any questions?
I just want to say, on behalf of the board, we do appreciate what you all do. We understand how important your jobs are, and we have the easy jobs over here, but you guys make us look good and make KUB look good. So we really do appreciate everything you all do. Okay.
Commissioners,
Thanks, Susan.
we have one more brief presentation. Susan's going to do it too. Last year, if you all recall, you adopted a new conflict of interest policy that required an annual conflict of interest and ethics disclosure by board members. Employees have done this for quite some time, but you all mandated it for yourselves, and you asked us to have a presentation to remind you of the terms of that and for you to submit your disclosure each January. So this will be the first time we do that, and I'll recognize Susan.
Commissioners, as you know, your job as a commissioner requires you to comply with a lot of regulations and requirements for ethics. And those date back all the way to some that originate in the city charter back in 1939, some that originate in Resolution 1, which was the first resolution passed by this body in 1939, and up to the present day with things like our conflict of interest policy, which was added to the bylaws in 2000. Ms. Roach mentioned our employee conflict of interest policy, which has been around since 2005. We actually just concluded that disclosure process recently. All of our employees have completed their forms and submitted those as required. In 2006, the state got more engaged in this beyond their existing state law. There is an ethics commission that was established, and as a result of their work, municipalities across the state adopted ethics policies, and our board did so as well. In 2012, we updated the ethics section of the bylaws when we did our bylaws review, and as Ms. Roach said, last year this board passed its own requirement to do an annual disclosure. The disclosure components, what's included in that is basically to align all of our disclosures with those governing statutes that I just mentioned. It does require disclosure if a conflict exists, and it also allows you to certify your compliance with the other provisions. Things like nepotism, that you will not accept gifts and gratuities, that you are disclosing your financial interests. You will not use your position or authority or KUB time and equipment inappropriately. The form itself is in your packets today, along with a copy of the ethics policy itself. The disclosure requirement is that we seek your disclosure following the first regular meeting in which the commissioner takes the oath of office. That's happened today. So if you would complete your forms between now and the February meeting, we'll be in compliance with that requirement. You're welcome to leave those with us today. We've also included an envelope if you'd like to take some time to digest the materials and send it to us. That would be fine too, or bring it in February. But that is the extent of the disclosure requirements, and we'd be glad to answer any questions in terms of public works as well.
Okay, and for those who haven't done this before, and none of us have done it this way before, we can perhaps talk about it at lunch and answer any questions. Is there any other business, either from the board or from the audience? If not, we are adjourned. I'll remind everybody that we will have a lunch session across the hall that's open to the public, and with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.